everyone, and welcome to the latest in our series of webinars all about sustainable leadership. I'm Dr. Richard MacKinnon. I'm going to be running this session. Now, you may have seen reference to one of my colleagues in the promotion of this session. Unfortunately, for personal reasons, he's not able to join us today. So you're stuck with me, but I hope I meet your expectations. A little bit of housekeeping before we jump in. The session's being recorded, and everyone who registered for this webinar is going to receive a copy of the recording. Along with the slides that I'm going to walk through, as well as some other resources that support the messaging from this. So as we go through this, please feel free to drop your questions into the chat, your comments, your reflections, but know that I'll be sending you through everything that I share on screen. So, a little bit about me, if we've not met before. I'm a workplace psychologist with about 25 years experience as a practitioner, and I'm the founder of WorkLifePsych, which has been in operation for just over 11 years. This session is the latest in a series called Sustainable Leadership, and I'm going to start our session by explaining what we mean by that. And the important thing is it's not another model of leadership. We don't need any more of those. I'll go back to basics and explain what we mean by compassion, and then address some of the really common misconceptions about it that we encounter in the work that we do in leadership coaching and leadership development. And then I want to make the case for leaders cultivating this quality, this skill of compassion, and share some of the evidence that demonstrates how it supports leaders at work, and then give some tips on how to actually cultivate compassion for the self and for others. Now, given the time constraints of a session of only 45 minutes, I'll be touching on these to give you a flavor, but by all means, get in touch if you have follow-up questions about the how-to aspect of this. And at any time, drop your questions into the chat. I'll try and keep an eye on that as we're going through. And if you want to test if it's working for you, feel free to just drop a little hello and let me know where you're joining us from. So let me start by outlining this concept, sustainable leadership. This is not, as I said, it's not a model of leadership, but rather a philosophy of leadership rooted in contextual behavioral science, and one that emphasizes sustainability at its core. So what we're saying here, hello, you're very welcome, Faye, Christina, thank you. What we're saying here is that contextual behavioral science is a very evidence-based framework for looking at human behavior and how to make behavioral changes. And we know from the evidence base that when we practice the skills that contribute to what we call our psychological flexibility, we get numerous benefits from that. And there's, over a couple of decades of really good quality research to demonstrate that by practicing these skills, we get these really good outcomes. And in the workplace, it includes well-being, goal attainment, job satisfaction, all the stuff that people want, or all of the outcomes that are desirable in the workplace. What we're saying here is that looking at leadership through that lens and emphasizing sustainability means that we are thinking long term. We're thinking about both the utility and the long-term consequences of short-term decisions and short-term behaviors, moving away from survival to thinking about the impact of how I get through today, how I get through the week, how I get through the month as a leader, and the impact that I as a leader have on those around me. What example am I setting? What am I role modeling? And how am I showing up? Now, we have a white paper outlining all of this that I'll be sending you as part of the resources that outlines this call for a fresh look at leadership, a fresh look at leadership development. But we've whittled it down to these three reminders on screen for leaders. We're asking our leaders to be intentional, to be in the moment, and to be intentional about how they interact with that moment. We're asking them to be adaptable, to navigate challenges with flexibility, and to be purposeful, which means that they know why they're doing what they're doing. And by and large, they're being led by something much more consequential, like their values. So intentional, adaptable, and purposeful. The white paper I'll share will outline all of this. And so we put together a series of webinars to look at this slice by slice, chunk by chunk, to make the case for this. And so today we turn our attention to compassion. So let me start. What do we mean by compassion? Again, an area that has had a lot of attention in the therapeutic space since the advent of compassion focused therapy and the evaluation of those interventions. We see more and more evidence of the positive benefits of cultivating compassion for ourselves and for others. One definition I like to share from Paul Gilbert's work, a great writer in this space. This is about having and cultivating a basic kindness with deep awareness of the suffering of oneself and of other living things, coupled with the wish and effort to relieve it. There's a lot in there, but I think there's two main parts to this. The awareness and the wanting to do something about it. And it's a point I bring up in coaching all the time that if we're going to have compassion for ourselves, we need to acknowledge the challenges, the difficulties, the pain and suffering, and we want to do something about it. So it's not helplessness. There is a proactivity to this. And we can break it out into three core skills, capabilities. Um, Non-judgmental mindful awareness. So when we're noticing pain, discomfort, suffering, all of the unease that our mind can give us, we are aware of it, but we're not judging it. We're not condemning ourselves for experiencing it. We are able to practice various forms of self-kindness, being gentle with ourselves, befriending ourselves, supporting ourselves. And we're acknowledging that we're part of something bigger. The opposite to common humanity is when we isolate ourselves, where we maybe buy into the story that I alone am feeling this. My pain, my suffering is unique. Whenever, if we're able to take a step back and say, look, I'm a fallible human. Humans experience difficulties. Many people have encountered things like this before. We're not negating it, but we're also not saying it's a special thing. It's actually part of being a human being. I'm going to map all of this onto a workplace context because I would say, as a practitioner, that's one of the things we need to do in this space to make it land with people, to increase the chances of them accepting it as an idea. We need to do a little bit of translation with the terminology that we use. But these are the three things we're looking to increase in leaders. Now, when we don't have that self-compassion, we can see a number of things showing up in individuals and particularly in leaders. When I'm coaching aspiring and existing leaders, this often comes up in the conversations. They won't frame it as I'm not being compassionate to myself, but what we can see coming out when they open up is that they have a very harsh inner critic, the voice inside that's telling them they're not good enough, and that is quite judgmental about their performance. This is often associated with perfectionism, where nothing is good enough, and an unsustainable striving, a unsustainable more goals, higher goals, more demanding targets. It's often accompanied also by imposterism, the belief that I don't really deserve this role, and any day now, it's all going to fall apart. I'll be found out. I'll be discovered. And as with perfectionism and striving and an inner critic, this has consequences in behavior and for our well-being, because imposterism can lead to some very unhelpful behaviors from a well-being perspective, but also from a performance perspective, such as working extra long hours, putting in enormous amounts of effort, and of course, the hyper alert, hyper vigilant, I'm going to be found out any day now. It can also result in people avoiding situations where they might need to have compassion for themselves. So avoiding anything where there could be some failure. And avoidance is rarely a helpful way of dealing with challenges or even the smallest things in life. And those with a lack of self compassion will find themselves, they have picked up and absorbed inflexible mental rules for themselves, for their own behavior, and sometimes they apply that to others. I must not, I need to, I can't, I can never. That kind of inflexible self talk. So it's rare that someone will present in leadership coaching with I want to develop my self-compassion. But we might arrive at that point by exploring how supportive, how friendly, how compassionate their self-talk is, and if they apply these kinds of judgment and harsh rules and um, targets to those around them, or if it's just themselves. Because it can be the case we might neglect ourselves from a compassion point of view, but be quite able to be compassionate to those around us. I mentioned a few moments ago the importance of being, contextually sensitive, of translating this for the context in which we're working. And that's because compassion is often misconstrued. There are lots of misconceptions, misunderstandings about what it means and what its consequences are. So I want to be really clear and knock those on the head right now. First of all, compassion is not a weakness. If anything, as I will explain shortly, compassion requires us to have strength and capability to be able to both acknowledge our pain and do something about that. For example, to withhold judgment. These are skills. It doesn't mean lowering our standards. If anything, when we can cultivate compassion in leaders, it can unlock the potential and the outputs of those around them. And there's evidence to show that it does. Being compassionate is not self pity, it is an appropriate reflection on what we are experiencing in any given moment. And it's more helpful than denial or suppression of these emotional states. To be aware of your own suffering is not narcissism or selfish. Now, I would expand on this by just saying that as long as we take action to alleviate the suffering and we do that in a sustainable way, it's not narcissism. But if we get stuck in, isn't life tough, and we're not doing anything about it, that's not as helpful at all. Now, an unfortunate misconception is that if I can develop compassion for myself and compassion for those around me, we'll all be happier. That's not the case because, as we'll see, compassion doesn't spark joy within us. The pain, the difficulty, the discomfort we might be feeling could hang around for a while we're looking to alleviate it. And in any case, happiness is a pretty terrible goal because it is a transient, impermanent state. Um, Satisfaction, purpose, meaning, values, alignment, these are goals we can work towards. But happiness, if we chase it, it means we could end up avoiding the things that don't make us happy. And that is at the root of a lot of the challenges that show up in my coaching practice. For example, it's at the root of a lot of the problems human beings face, full stop. Avoidance, avoidance, avoidance. So I want to knock these on the head. I want to be really clear that compassion does not mean we can't do difficult things. For example, it doesn't mean we can't give feedback. It doesn't mean we can't increase performance and we can't make tough decisions, but we can do them with compassion. It's not an either or. So let's make this link then. Compassion is good for everybody, but this series is all about leadership and something we've been really clear about since the beginning. Leadership is tough, and we don't want anything that we've been saying in this series to come across as harsh criticism of leaders or unrelenting bad news about leadership. But it is difficult, and we want to ensure that people can see the relevance of compassion and compassionate behavior to leaders. And me search, not research, but my observation of having been involved in leadership development for over 20 years is that this aspect is often neglected. When someone's putting together a program, capabilities like bringing compassion to life for self and others is something that rarely features. So I'm here to bang the drum for that and explain just how that can be done. So this is a long quote, but I did want to share it from a paper by Weston Bailey from the King's Fund, and I'll share a link to this. But I wanted to share the whole thing because I think there's so many important messages in here about the leaders who have compassion, empathize. They empathize with their colleagues and seek to understand the challenges they face. They're committed to supporting others to cope with and respond successfully to work challenges. They're focused on enabling those they lead to be effective and thrive in their work. Compassionate leaders don't have all the answers and don't simply tell people what to do. Instead, they engage with the people they work with to find shared solutions to problems. So, this is hands on leadership. And this is about acknowledging challenges, but also getting involved to try and find solutions to them. So, what does that mean from a behavioral point of view? In the same paper, I really like this four-part breakdown of what compassionate leadership looks like. And of course, we can help people cultivate this with support in either coaching or in a leadership development program. First of all, attending, showing up, in other words, being present with and for others. So, it is a continual light bulb moment for me when working with leaders to help them have better conversations and better connection with others. The power of just being present, the power of giving someone your attention and focusing on them and letting them know, I have time for you. I'm here for you, whether it's in person, it's on a video call. I am present for you. This flies in the face of the busy leader model or the absent leader model, too busy to come and see people like you. Secondly, understanding. This is about intentionally taking the time to explore situations, to try and better understand the challenges that their teams are facing. Not with off the cuff responses or here's a common sense solution, but really working hard to understand other people's perspectives. And I suppose a really good example of this would be, well, I as the leader don't find this problematic, but other people do. Let me see if I can understand it from their perspective. Or if I was in their shoes, I wouldn't find this difficult, but they are. Let me try and understand that perspective. It also involves empathizing to have genuine understanding and experience of those difficulties, but without letting them overwhelm them. So if we're both overwhelmed, then I can't really be as helpful to you as a leader. But if I'm so distant that I don't even understand your emotional perspective, it's not going to be as effective. And then helping. It's whatever we do, we're doing it with intention. I want to improve this situation, and I understand why I'm choosing to do it in this way. So this is a nice link back to what I described at the outset, our simple reminder for leaders to be intentional as part of that sustainable leadership perspective. There's a really nice point they make in this article as well, which I'll paraphrase. I haven't quoted it on screen, but nobody's got time for this. And the challenge, I can't be compassionate. I can't do all these things. Well, actually, you can go through what's required of a leader and be compassionate as you do it. Or you can signal to others, I'm too busy to attend to the little things. I'm too busy to listen. I'm too busy to try and see it from your perspective. This is not about time. This is not about busyness. It's about intention. So, one slide to summarize a lot of research, but we know that when leaders are compassionate, the people that are exposed to their behavior and their decisions see an uptick in their well being, their interpersonal effectiveness. It contributes positively to estimations of psychological safety, which is a real driver for team effectiveness and organizational effectiveness. It contributes positively to employee satisfaction. And in some of the research that Michael West and colleagues have done in healthcare settings, they found a link between that and care for and patient satisfaction in those settings. So this is a very powerful way of improving the employee experience where leaders are able to really connect with these skills, bring this to life, and show an authenticity that is sometimes lacking. So I want to pause at this point before I go any further and check in. I haven't seen any questions popping up in the chat, but let me know if there's anything you'd like me to elaborate on, or if you've got any other perspectives on this so far. I hope it's landing well with you. Again, in a reasonably short period of time, like a lunchtime session like this, we can't go into all the details, but my goal here is to inspire you, to get you thinking about this, to please come back to me with questions about how to. But also, if you have responsibility for leadership development, if you're an aspiring or actual leader, that you see this as something really important to go on your task list, your to-do list for leadership development. Okay, not seeing anything appear in the chat. Great. So let's have a look at how we can cultivate compassion for ourselves. And this is for anyone. Anyone on this session may find this useful. You don't have to be a leader. So, what are we looking to do when we're cultivating self-compassion? I really like the way that Kirsten Neff puts this across. And I think the most important part of this entire quotation is the first line. Self-compassion is a practice of goodwill, not good feelings. This is a lot like when we talk about putting values into action. Values are what we want to do, not how we want to feel. Because sometimes when we put our values into action, it doesn't feel fun, but it's important. It doesn't feel joyous, but it's really meaningful. Self-compassion is not about automatically feeling good, but it's about wanting to bring that goodwill to yourself to try and do something about the situation that you're in. Just seen something pop up in the chat from Faye. Thank you, Faye. It's useful and not something I've thought of, the term compassion in dealing with leaders in a coaching setting. I'm a bit more vague in this area, so the aspects or good prompts. Fantastic. So any questions as I'm going through, if you want to map it onto that coaching setting or other leadership context, just let me know. So Kirsten goes on to say, with self-compassion, we mindfully accept that the moment is painful. Remember that mindfulness that we talked about earlier is about mindful, non-judgmental awareness, and embrace ourselves with kindness and care in response, remembering that imperfection is part of the shared human experience. So we're not looking to suppress or somehow instantly remove this pain, and we're not trying to judge ourselves for experiencing it, and we're acknowledging it happens. It happens. We're humans. The most important part, though, is a practice of goodwill, not good feelings. It's not an instant fix, but it's moving us towards something beneficial. It's moving us towards what matters. When we look at the evidence for improved self-compassion, it's really quite compelling. And across a whole host of studies over the years, we've seen that when we can cultivate higher levels of compassion for the self, it's associated with lower levels of depression and anxiety, higher levels of general life satisfaction, higher levels of interpersonal connectedness, higher levels of personal initiative, higher levels of positive effect or mood, and more frequent use of sustainable coping strategies. Now, this is something we've spoken about before. All of these outcomes are great, and you can imagine the benefit it would be for organizational leaders to experience these because of performance, but also the impact they have on those around them. But this final point I find really useful. More frequent use of sustainable coping strategies means that we're dealing with difficulties in a way that isn't going to make them worse. we're coping with challenges in a way that we could keep using over time without that method, without that coping strategy, eroding our well-being. So it's something I work on a lot with my clients when they're in a difficult, pressurized working environment to equip them with a coping toolkit that contributes to their well-being and enables them to replace their former old coping style of maybe using substances, maybe using avoidance, maybe using distraction, hoping it will all go away, but rather to do things that both boost well-being and help them get through to the other side. So there's a compelling argument for everybody to work on their self-compassion. Now, conceptually, what are we doing? We're helping the individual replace certain perspectives, certain attitudes with others. That's a journey we're going on. And so this isn't linear. This is a neat collection of boxes, obviously, to represent it. But the journey isn't always going to be as neat and linear as this. I've just seen a question pop up from Christina. Thank you, Christina. To what extent are there cultural and or organizational differences that impact the findings that you're coaching? So one of them actually just last week, I published the latest episode of the podcast where I interviewed a fellow psychologist, Dr. Austin Tay, on leadership and intercultural differences. And I'll just echo a point we made there, which was it's so much more important for leaders not to echo simple, um, simplistic, stereotypical intercultural differences, but rather to lead the individual in front of them, to attend to the person, because the person is much more complex than the passport they hold or the flag they wave or the location they're in. On top of that, we've been emphasizing all the way through that leadership and leadership development needs to be contextually sensitive. In other words, paying attention to the context that the leader is in so that what they do and how they do it works for that environment. And that could be a different nation that they're in, but it could be a different organization. It could be within the organization working with a different group, maybe a more junior group of stakeholders or a specific group of technical experts, that they are framing their approach and they're adapting their approach based on the context they're in, not what they automatically do or what's easy for them or what they've always done before. Now, what I'm not aware of, and I think it's a really interesting question, cultural differences with regard to the benefits of compassion or how compassion might manifest. I think what's limiting about the research that I've encountered and read is that it has, I would think it's fair to say, a Western emphasis, like a lot of the workplace psychology research, although that's changing over time. But in the work, to finish the question there, with my coaching, I think that the organizational culture plays a much bigger role for individuals in coaching than national culture because it's the organizational culture that they're coming up against every day that's being reinforced every day, and that includes things like performance standards and goals and the what we do here and how we do it aspects of organizational culture. So to echo my earlier point, I focus on that individual. And if they want to bring things to the table that reflect their background, that's fine for context. But coaching is about moving forward from where we are today to where they want to get to. I hope that makes sense. Oh, would you then work with the whole leadership team of an organization? Absolutely. I frequently do. And next Monday afternoon, I'm going to be doing just that with a new organization, with a new leadership team. Not in session one, just about compassion. But getting that team together is a very powerful exercise. And I'm going to be addressing some um, evident potential areas for growth, shall we say, with that team. And it's actually one of the reasons that we have this focus on leadership in this campaign, not because leaders are special or more deserving of attention or anything like that, but the impact leaders have on the effectiveness, the success, the direction of an organization, the impact they have on others means that it's a great place to instill these qualities, these behaviors, because of the role modeling that can come from that. So brilliant. Thank you, Christina. Great questions. Great questions. I'm doing my best to reach into the back of my mind to get them all those answers. So, for example, we're helping the individual move from self judgment, potentially harsh self judgment, to self kindness. That's not dropping standards or not caring anymore. It is about, as we're doing the hard work, we're looking after ourselves. I'm not being harsh when I make a mistake. I'm maybe looking to improve. I'm looking to make up for that mistake. It's a little bit like the difference between guilt and remorse. Guilt is rarely a helpful emotion to dwell on. Remorse acknowledges I did something wrong and I'm going to make good on that. Self-judgment is rarely helpful because it's so inflexible. It's categorical. There's no room for the shades of gray along the way. From isolation to common humanity, what does that mean? Well, it's a little bit like the I'm the only one who's feeling this, and I'm the only one who has ever felt anything like this and experienced it, to an acknowledgement that we're one of many. Difficulties happen, pain is part of life, discomfort is part of doing meaningful things. Not all our efforts result in success. It's part of being a human. And this isn't to downplay it or remove it, but to see it in context. And rather than avoidance of pain or over identification with pain, cultivation of a mindful, non judgmental awareness of it. Avoidance, when we're trying to avoid our pain, we'll either avoid the situation where it arises, or we're trying to suppress or remove thoughts and emotions. And that rarely works well because we're pushing against a mind that's not like a filing cabinet where we can take things out, but rather a networked mind where, in our efforts to remove and change thinking, we're just creating new networks. We're creating new links between what we want to get rid of and what we want to replace it with. A mindful awareness of that enables us to notice the thoughts, notice the emotions, notice the pain, and not over identify with it. In other words, I am my pain, but rather I'm a human who experiences this, who experiences failure, who experiences setbacks, who experiences self doubt, and all of that other stuff that we don't want to experience. Now, this journey for individuals will be different depending on the context. The conversations will be different. Maybe even the use of terminology will be different. I and my team are very pragmatic in that regard. It's not about, dropping a textbook on someone and taking them through it in this way, but rather demonstrating what hasn't worked for them up till now and shining a light on an alternative path and supporting them to practice and experiment with these new approaches. So the simple things, and yet they could be very difficult for an individual who is so far not expressed or experienced a lot of compassion for themselves. We might explore helping them set realistic targets. So not perfection, but what do you reasonably think you could achieve this week? What do you think you could get done? And when you do, celebrate. And when you don't, you explore the gap between the two and how you might do it differently next time. It's not an unrelenting better, more journey, which is unsustainable. But if you don't set targets, how will you know you failed? Which is the the discussion I have all the time. I'm not good enough. Well, how do you know? You haven't measured anything. You haven't set targets. You're just assuming. And on that note, helping someone get in touch with and monitor, observe, watch their self-talk to see thoughts as thoughts and not rules to follow or an ultimatum to comply with. A really simple thing here would be to explore whether what you're saying to yourself is what you would say to someone you really cared about. And in doing so, learning how to befriend the inner critic, which seems very counterintuitive. But again, let's remember our inner critic is just us. It's just thoughts. It's thoughts that are maybe stemming from a good place. Bear with me. Maybe stemming from, I want to keep you safe. And that's not good enough. And therefore, failure isn't safety. Or I want you to be really successful. So therefore, I'm going to keep calling you a failure until you are. It's a very blunt instrument. But if we fight the inner critic, or if we try and remove the inner critic, we're kind of arm wrestling with something faster and stronger than us. Befriending the inner critic is a little bit just like saying, okay, thanks. I see what you're trying to do. Very gentle. There's no fighting. There's no struggling. We're not getting rid of it, but we're also kind of cutting it off at the knees by saying, okay, thank you. And now I'm moving on. Learning how to see ourselves flexibly is a huge part of cultivating self-compassion. In other words, I am not my job. I am not the last piece of feedback that I got. I am not how many people like me, or I'm not how much money is in my bank account, or my postcode, or the car I drive. I am millions of things, but if I only pay attention to a small subset of these, I'm hanging my self-worth on something impermanent that could be taken away from me. Many things are temporary in nature, impermanent. Jobs, relationships, homes. And so what we want to do is help people acknowledge that they're made up of so many things, some of which they like and some of which they don't like. And that's okay. And that they can acknowledge there are aspects of them that they can bring to life. There are aspects of them that they could work on and get better. There are aspects of them that other people won't like, and that's okay as well. So, an in-depth exploration of what makes you you. Closely related to that is learning how to apply what you see as really important in life, your values, to you and to the people around you. And it's really interesting the number of coaches I've worked with over the years who've identified compassion or being supportive or being a good friend as one of their values while they neglect to apply that to themselves. So they see it as really important and something they should do to others, but they don't apply it to themselves. And sometimes that's the light bulb moment they need to say, I could do this for me. I'm doing it for everyone else. I could do it for me as well. And of course, self compassion is not just about how we think, it's about what we do. So we had a whole session on coping and self-care, and I've got a couple of podcast episodes in the pipe about self-care and coping, specifically for leaders. But this is about helping leaders engage in small practices done regularly, almost habitually, to look after themselves. Now, the challenge we have with this is that sometimes, well, if you do it after this session, Google self-care and you'll see photographs of people in a bubble bath with a glass of wine. That's relaxation. That's great. But self-care could be the stuff that is helpful to us, but not necessarily fun in the moment. Self-care includes rest. Self-care includes having a difficult conversation. Self-care could be about asking for help. So on the one hand, it could be enjoyable, relaxing, fun, but it could also be this is just a good investment for me if I do this now and I don't um, neglect it or try and avoid it or procrastinate about it. So we've got a combination of things here: thinking skills, identity-based things, small practices, and building self-awareness. It's almost the same when we think about compassion for others, but just having compassion for self doesn't automatically lead to having compassion for others. And as I mentioned earlier, it is very common that people can be compassionate towards others and not themselves. But in leaders, it's really important to call it out as these are things that you could do for those around you. When we are compassionate for others, as Paul Gilbert said, it's opening one's awareness to the pain of others without avoiding or disconnecting from it. Other people's discomfort can be uncomfortable for us. But to be compassionate, to do something about that, we need to be open to acknowledging it's happening, allowing feelings of kindness towards others and a desire to ameliorate their suffering to emerge. So I acknowledge it, I'm not turning away from it, and I want to do something about it. If we map this onto the workplace, this could involve someone providing one of their direct reports with support and accountability and feedback and a performance improvement plan. It's not necessarily let's go and have a cup of tea to talk about your problems. Absolutely could be, but it is um, based on kindness and compassion and improving the situation. At the same time, for many managers, for many leaders, when someone else's discomfort comes to the fore, maybe a well-being problem, a mental health condition, a family problem, and that comes to the workplace, what we also don't want them to do is try and solve everyone's problems because it could well sit without their expertise. It could be something that they could conceivably make worse if they try and improve it. So some of the kindness they might want to bring to these situations is the kindness of being present and listening and acknowledging, doing what's in their power. Maybe giving someone some more flexibility, some time off, signposting resources. And as we all know, as humans, a lot of the time, if we've got a problem and we're looking for social support, someone to listen to us, the last thing we want is solutions. We just want acknowledgement. And it's really powerful when leaders do that. They take the time to listen, to be present, and not try and problem solve. So, again, a very neat collection of boxes, but we're trying to build these capabilities within leaders to not judge, which is a very cognitively easy thing to do. In other words, I know why they're doing that. I know why they missed that target. I know why they were late. To curiosity, which is more work but opens our minds. I wonder why they didn't deliver that on time. I wonder why they're so upset. Right? Curiosity helps us in so many different situations, so many different contexts. From evaluation of others, categorization of others, putting them in a box, to engaging with them, to learning more about them. And from simple labeling of people, which again is very easy for us to do from a cognitive perspective. Um, he's unreliable, she's successful, to actually, well, let's talk about the behaviors because the person is impossible to label accurately. No one on this webinar would wish to be labeled with one word. We are all much more than that. So learning to focus on the distinction between the person and their behaviors and what's up for change. And again, something really fundamental that challenges leaders' view of what leadership is to move from a conceptualization of it's me and it's them to it's us. Now, the us might differ depending on the focus of the conversation, of the intervention, of the work being done. But me and them supports, I'm somehow different to them. It flies in the face of the common humanity. Us really supports that. We're part of something together, whether that's a team, a company, a community, a nation, humanity. It's acknowledging all of that. Now, this can be done in coaching. This can be done in training. This could be done just like building self-compassion through a leadership development program, um, like a golden thread running through all of the other skills and self-awareness building activities. So that leads me to the final point, which is to sort of elaborate and explain what it is that we do with this, maybe to bring it to a little bit more life. So again, the coaching that we do with aspiring and existing leaders supports their well-being and their performance, and sometimes that is explicitly by helping them um, address the inner critic, the unsustainable goals they're working towards, the harsh rules they're applying to themselves, and developing that compassion. And sometimes it's about helping them cultivate those skills so they can be a more compassionate leader for others. And it could be subsets of those as well. As I said, coping and self-care is a big theme in the well-being work that we do with individuals. But of course, that can be encapsulated in a training course for a group to take them through these skills very, very explicitly, how to be compassionate towards yourself and others. And of course, we do everything from design and run programs to participate in others' programs. That's a model that works quite well. A long-standing leadership program, we can learn about it, understand the goals, but then step in to take specific parts of it that play to our strengths as workplace psychologists. Of course, if you'd like to know any more about any of that, please feel free to get in touch. You can drop me an email there. I'll be emailing everybody with the resources from this session, so you can just respond to that email if you've got follow-up, if you've got questions or feedback. And I'll be sharing links to the other resources from this campaign so you can find out more about sustainable leadership, and including a link to our final webinar in this series, which is next month, where we'll be exploring some of the myths about leadership and knocking them on the head as well. There's so many misunderstandings about what leaders are and what leadership ought to be. I've just spotted another question in the chat. Do you encounter self-selection of clients, organizations who are open to your message? By which I mean, are you only reaching those ones who are open anyway and miss out on the group that would probably need it most? Oh, this is such a good question. I would say invariably the people I work with are self-selecting in some way. They're open. But that doesn't mean from day one we're talking about these topics. It could be, and it often is, working with a new organization that we go in at I was going to say pedestrian. That's the wrong word. At a very transactional level. Can you help this group of managers be better at giving feedback? Absolutely. But as part of that work, we realize it's not feedback skills, it's something about them and the culture and what's being encouraged. And that's when I open up the conversation to we could help with more here. And just understanding what good feedback looks like is not going to achieve what you hope, or is flying in the face of all the other messages you're giving to your managers and your leaders. I will say I get phone calls out of the blue from organizations who have literally seen a YouTube video and said, we want to talk about that. But it is also in some organizations about the evidence. Here's the evidence for what works, and we can do it. And that's if they appreciate scientific evidence. And sometimes it's about, you have this need, we can do that, and here's how we'd like to do it. And does that sit well with you? Brilliant. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, everyone, for the questions and comments. We've run over time, as I invariably do. So thank you for your patience. Thanks for signing up. And of course, if you're watching the recording of this, feel free to add your questions to the space down below. And thanks, everyone, and hopefully see you at a future session. Take care. Bye-bye.